Hey, this is Scott. I'm following up with a series that I'm doing on pricing right now. So I did an introductory part one, and then I got some questions on going a little bit deeper, and specifically to start with, what's pricing normalization, and then I thought I would just actually add maybe general normalization and why as analytics professionals or data scientists that we actually go through the normalization process. I can make this very brief, but yeah, I thought it might be valuable to do that. So this was our we were looking at excuse me pricing optimization overview, the general components that we go through when we optimize pricing. And you'll see this in the first video, but we kind of go through this stuff. And one of the things that we do is we create, and this might have been missing actually from the first one, I apologize, but we create what's called decision variables. And these are normalized prices, um, so that we can compare statistically or mathematically between our segments once we segment. So we do that prior to our segmentation part. So after we do our data analysis, we start creating looking at price drivers, and we do that through these normalized prices, something that we call DVs, or normalized prices. So normalization of a price. Before we get into that, let me just kind of start at a very high level while we do this stuff in general, right? So we normalize data all the time. We do statistical normalization. For example, when you think about, you know, I don't want to go too deep, parametric or, bell-shaped data, we typically look at standard deviations. And so if you're familiar with z-score, right? So z-score is how far a value is from the mean, and then divided by the standard deviation. And we speak in terms of, 95% confidence or 3 sigma or 2 sigma. So that's statistical normalization that we go through, where we, no matter what unit of measurement, whether it's dollars, whether it's millions of dollars, whether it's weight, pounds, ounces, micrograms or kilograms or whatever, once we actually compare a data set, we can speak in terms of statistical variation, right? And then mathematically, we know if the data has a parametric shape, like a normal bell curve, then we can make judgments that 3 standard deviations on the high side, that, that's going to capture 99.86%, minus one, or whatever that is, 0.24% or whatever, of the values are only going to exceed 3 standard deviations. 6 sigma, one part out of a million, which would be 6 sigma. So anyway, and then other ways to do it, you can do percentiles, right? You can look at your data. You can look at the percentile, the top 5%, the so you can normalize based upon on percentiles. You can use economic indices, such as like stock. I mean, the whole in the U.S., the Dow Jones Industrial Average, that's an index, right? So you take it, you base everything on a unit at a time, and then you look at the progression over time, and hopefully it'll just continue to rise slowly over time, but it's all based upon an index itself. It's not based on the actual dollar amounts of any particular stock in the index. It's based upon the normalization of the index to a point in time when they came up with the index. And then they use that over time. And then the other thing is to use a transformation, right? You can divide by some meaningful number, and that's exactly what we're going to do with pricing. So for normalized price or a decision variable, price themselves, is, typically in dollars or currency, pounds or whatever it might be. And then what we want to do is we want to make a unitless value. So we want to take the currency metric out of it. And so one of the things that we might do is we might look at the margin. So that's a percentage. There's different types of margin. There can be gross margin, but essentially it's the percentage of profit that is going to fall to the bottom line. Essentially, at the highest level, it's the unit price minus the unit cost historically, and that gives you the margin percent. And then, if you want to look at full blown margin, you can add other overhead and other values into it as well. You can look at simple markup. Markup is basically price over cost, but or some sort of list multiplier. Oftentimes, when you're in business to business, B2B, you'll have a price list that you go off of, and you can look at the actual negotiated price in comparison to that list. But the bottom line is, once you do this calculation, it's unitless in that you're no longer in dollars or pounds or currency value. You're actually in a unitless value. And so the interesting, or one of the key things is that once you do this, you have a comparison across time, right? So values that were 5 years back are comparable to today because you used that ratio. You used whatever it was to make this this normalization happen. And so it's much more comparable than if you were to take dollars, because dollars 5 years ago, if you have an inflationary period, they're not comparable to today, right? Because the inflation of the currency itself could have a big impact on it. So that's one of the things that you want to take into consideration. And you want to be able to measure segments, right? So if I'm selling products, I may have some products that are $1 million products. I may have some dollars that are products that are penny products. So how do I compare those? Well, if I normalize those, at least based on like the cost it takes me to produce those, then I have a much more comparable metric between those segments. So in comparison, etc. So let's see. Again, it's more actionable. It's more stable across time. It's more stable across different products or services or whatever you're trying to price. But that's kind of the bottom line. And typically, you want to come up with a normalization method that's easy to compute, and it's reliable. So yeah, those are some high level topics. Hopefully that provides something. If you have comments or questions, you can leave a comment in the video. So I'll see you next time.